Adolf Hitler is the very personification of evil.
Hitler is the most genocidally evil dictator that there ever was.
He is responsible for the deaths of 6 million Jews, hundreds of thousands of Slavs, gypsies, homosexuals, and people with mental and physical disabilities.
The screams, the horror of men, women and children piled on top of one another. Horror scenes worse than Dante's Inferno would be enacted.
This is the story of a man so diabolical, he convinces a nation of sophisticated, civilized people to be complicit in his sickening crimes.
Planned, organized, industrial-scale destruction of a whole people. That is new. That is something horrifically new.
And how a man born like any other can turn into the most malevolent dictator the world has ever seen. As soon as the Soviets break through the German front in early 1945, the outcome of World War II is clear. The Nazi Führer, Adolf Hitler, knows defeat is inevitable. Even so, on January the 30th, the 12th anniversary of his assumption to power, he makes one last public address.
I expect every German to do his duty to the last, and that he be willing to take upon himself every sacrifice he will be asked to make.
For 10 minutes, Hitler warns his people that after the war, the European nations would not be able to withstand Bolshevism, and calls on them to rise up against the Soviets, even if it means all of Germany will come crumbling down.
He was a Samson who wanted to pull down the pillars of the temple upon him.
For the Führer, he and the German state are one. What he wants, it wants. And if he dies, it must die too. So Hitler orders his men to carry out the Nero Decree, the destruction of his country's infrastructure as a punishment for its defeat. Yet the lingering question to this day is not that this madman is losing the war, but how someone who holds such deranged views came to power in the first place. In the spring of 1889, in a small apartment in Braunau-on-the-Inn, Austria, a town near the German border, Adolf Hitler is born. The fourth of what will be 6 children for this devout Roman Catholic family, young Adolf is quickly acquainted with death as he witnesses 3 brothers and a sister die in infancy. Then there's his father, Alois.
He was someone who would come back home having had a drink and would be violent, would be abusive.
He didn't spare the rod. He thrashed Hitler, teaching him from very early on that might was right and that strength and brutality were allied to domination.
Some beatings are so bad that his mother, Clara, throws herself across her son to take the blows herself. According to her doctor, Eduard Bloch, she was above all absorbed in the care of her children. And although Adolf was not a mother's boy in the usual sense, I have never witnessed a closer attachment. In 1900, Hitler moves to Linz and enters high school, where he is introduced to a doctrine that will influence him his entire life. It will give him a sense of purpose he never had.
He had a history teacher called Leopold Puch, who was fired up with the idea of German nationalism.
Austria is part of a vast empire with ancient roots. Germany is then a newly created country dating from just 1866. Both peoples speak the same language, and a radical idea is dawning that the two should become one.
It was melding together extreme nationalism and patriotism to make a person believe in their country passionately and be part of their racial community. Hitler took that idea that the Germans should be united together in this kind of pan-German, Greater German Reich.
In 1907, at just 16 years old, Hitler leaves school for the Austrian capital, Vienna, one of Europe's greatest cities. The young Hitler is armed with a thick set of drawings, determined to train at the prestigious Academy of Arts. Over 100 candidates apply. 28 are to be chosen.
He submits drawings. These are examined, and in the notes that they left the examiners, they say, reasonable drawings, heads very poorly done, no great talent. We do not recommend admission.
Rejection is followed by deep personal loss when his mother Clara dies of cancer. Then comes a final blow. He is rejected by the Academy again.
His second rejection is the more disturbing one because this was absolute now. He had no chance of returning.
Hitler plunges into a deep depression. He makes no attempt to find a job and joins the multitude of men out of work. Finally, he ends up in a homeless hostel, an experience that will brutalize him forever.
I owe it to that period that I grew hard and am still capable of being hard.
To survive, he sells pictures of Viennese buildings, and he also becomes a close observer of politics. He is repelled but fascinated by the growing socialist movement.
And he really thought, unless the right can find an antidote to this, we're going to have a communist world.
He's especially intrigued by one of their tactics.
What did influence him was the way that the socialists used violence on the streets to make sure that they got their point across.
I achieved an equal understanding of the importance of physical terror toward the individual and the masses.
Other observations start stirring in Hitler's head. Vienna in 1910 has a huge Jewish population. There are more than 175,000 Jews living in the city, and Hitler starts to loathe them.
Wherever I went, I now saw Jews, and the more I saw, the more sharply they set themselves apart in my eyes from the rest of humanity. I had ceased to be a weak-kneed cosmopolitan and became an anti-Semite.
At a mere 21 years of age, the main building blocks of the Nazis' evil ideology are coming together. Intense personal hardness, extreme nationalism, a belief in the use of violence and terror, and a loathing of Jews.
Vienna was and remained for me the hardest, though most thorough school of my life. In it, I obtained the foundations for a political view which never left me.
Then in August 1914 comes an event that will affect Hitler and all German-speaking peoples in a most horrific way: World War I. At 25, he apparently joins the cheering crowds on the first day of the war.
There's a famous photo of him in the midst of a crowd in the Odeonsplatz, grinning broadly at the announcement that war had broken out.
Smiling because he really thinks that Germany can make its bid for European power, and he wants to be part of it, and on that very day, he signs up to fight for the German army.
The young German nationalist, Adolf Hitler, joins a Bavarian infantry regiment as a messenger. His job is to take vital information up to the front line. But carrying messages was not a safe option.
The regiment suffered very, very high casualties indeed, and Hitler had found out that he wasn't a coward, that he could stand the fact that bullets were whizzing all around him.
In his first year, Hitler is awarded the coveted Iron Cross for bravery. He also shows his characteristic refusal to compromise. When German and British troops meet in no man's land on Christmas Day 1914 to sing carols, he will have no part of it.
How dare they, he said, fraternize in a war? These are the enemy. We can't shake the hands of the enemy who we're going to kill. No, this war was a fight to the finish, and he wanted Germany to win it.
But in 1918, his luck runs out. At the Battle of Ypres, he's blinded by a British poison gas attack.
Particularly virulent sort of gas called mustard gas, which attacks the lungs, the eyelids, the soft tissues.
The wounded Hitler is transported to a military hospital in northern Germany for treatment.
Usually, when a soldier is particularly affected by that attack, he is blinded, but the blindness goes away in a few hours or days.
But strangely, Hitler's eyesight doesn't return. His doctors can't understand it. One story goes, they ask a leading German psychologist, Edmund Forster, to take a look at him. Forster concludes that his blindness is hysterical, not physical. He prescribes that the only way to cure Hitler is to boost his ego. Forster hypnotizes Hitler and tells him that he is blind, but as God has made him an exceptional person, he can regain his eyesight again through sheer willpower.
Hitler would have learned that despite his humble rank and his humble background, he was a special being. And the idea that he had been singled out by destiny for a special role in history.
Forster allegedly tells Hitler that he is the person who can make Germany great again. It's a message that Hitler takes to heart. He is not like other men. Forster then holds a lit candle in front of Hitler's eyes and says that if he can see the flame, he's cured. The mind game works. Hitler's vision returns, and he becomes convinced he is a man of destiny. At the end of World War I, Corporal Adolf Hitler hears some devastating news.
He says a trembling pastor came in and said Germany had surrendered, the war was over, Germany had lost.
Everything went black again before my eyes. There followed terrible days and even worse nights. In these nights, hatred grew in me. Hatred for those responsible for this deed.
Convinced he is a man of destiny, Hitler makes a promise to himself.
When I was confined to bed, the idea came to me that I would liberate Germany, that I would make it great. I knew immediately that it would be realized.
By 1919, the 30-year-old Hitler returns to a Munich ravaged by war. He believes that Germany only surrendered because it had been betrayed by left-wing politicians, many of whom were Jews, who plotted to ensure Germany's defeat.
He viewed that armistice in 1918 as a stab in the back for the German military and had been done, in his mind, by the politicians of the centre and, crucially, by the Jews.
True to his vow to make Germany great again, he drifts into a fringe political party, the German Workers' Party. They have no members of parliament and only a few hundred supporters, but they do have rousing meetings in beer halls. He loves their communist bashing rhetoric and their hatred of the Jews. The party members quickly notice Hitler's passion as a speechmaker and enlist him as their propaganda chief.
Within a year, it becomes known as the National Socialist German Workers' Party, what we now call the Nazi Party, and Adolf Hitler is its leader.
Once in charge, Hitler starts to apply one of the lessons he learned in Vienna. Violence works. He forms a paramilitary organization made up largely of disgruntled ex-soldiers like himself, his so-called brown shirts, or stormtroopers.
The Nazis' paramilitaries were prepared to commit acts of thuggery and even of murder. And this, of course, accorded very much with Hitler's own philosophy of force and violence.
At this stage, Hitler's aim is to seize power by force, not election. So in 1923, he plans a coup. His inspiration comes from Italy. He particularly admires the rise of a new popular right-wing movement, the fascists, led by Benito Mussolini.
He saw Mussolini was this giant poser with his shaven head, and everybody knew about Mussolini and the fascist party.
In October 1922, Benito Mussolini marches on Rome with his 30,000 black shirts and storms to power in Italy.
The evidence from Italy was that power could be seized. You didn't need to win it through the ballot box.
Hitler decides to do the same. With his 600 stormtroopers, he takes over a beer hall in Bavaria, where the state prime minister, Gustav von Kahr, is holding a meeting. As he enters the building, he fires a shot into the ceiling and declares a national revolution. Then he marches into Munich to seize power. The state police have been alerted and open fire. "14 Nazis are killed. Only wounded, Hitler manages to escape. But 3 days later, he's arrested and sentenced to 5 years for treason. It looks like he's finished. Prison turns out to be a time of reflection for the future Führer. It's a chance to turn his extreme views into something that resembles a coherent political program. With his fellow Nazi Rudolf Hess taking dictation, he writes a book that will be read the world over, Mein Kampf. It's Adolf Hitler's blueprint for a new world order.
Mein Kampf, the seminal book of the Nazi movement and of Hitler personally, a kind of mixture of autobiography and political manifesto. It is the key document, since all his ideas are there.
Hitler talks about how Germany is a racially superior nation. It's an idea that comes from a bastardized version of Charles Darwin's concept of the survival of the fittest. He claims that all true Germans belong to a race whose blood is stronger than that of all other peoples, the Aryans. Proof of the Aryan superiority would be their ability to dominate other peoples.
He very much identified the Aryan idea with the modern Germans. They were supposed to have physical characteristics such as blonde hair, blue eyes. They were supposed to be tall and manly.
Nature knows no political boundaries. She puts living creatures on this globe and watches the free play of forces. The stronger must dominate and not blend with the weaker, thus sacrificing his own greatness.
They were the people who were going to be the master race in Nazi Germany, and everybody else was coming lower down the pecking order, and God help you if you were near the bottom.
To no surprise, in Hitler's deranged universe, the Jews are the people at the bottom, as he refers to them, a cancer, eating away at pure Germanness.
The Jews were prominent, and they were involved in finance, so banking and the loan system was tied up with Jews. Very easy there for a bankrupt nation, bankrupt in money and in ideas, to turn on the Jews as the obvious explanation.
The personification of the devil as the symbol of all evil assumes the living shape of the Jew.
He denounces the Jews as the agents of Germany's downfall, as an inherently corrupt enemy within who must be destroyed, must be eliminated.
Anti-Semitism is nothing new in Germany or Austria, but Hitler takes extremism to extremes. Even in the early 20s, he is explicitly writing about his desire to wipe the Jews off the face of the earth.
He talks about Jews being held under poison gas. So this is a very, very chilling precursor of the actuality which came to pass 20 years later with the actual Holocaust.
Hitler argues that the Aryans' racial superiority should drive his foreign policy. First, they should be allowed to take back all territory that was taken from Germany at the end of World War I, and rebuild the army to become the most powerful in Europe. Then he goes further.
One of the most sinister ideas advanced in Mein Kampf was the idea of Lebensraum, the German word for living space.
In Hitler's view, the Germans have the right to seize land from the racially weaker peoples. This means the Slavs, in particular, the Russians.
Where was space to be found? In the east. The millions of square miles stretching across into Russia. That's where Germany must expand.
By the time Hitler leaves prison, he adds one other extraordinary idea to his set of beliefs. He is not just an exceptional person, he has become the Messiah. At a celebration in 1926, he announces to his friends that he will complete the work that Christ had begun, but had been unable to finish. He even claims that he is visited by an almighty power who tells him that he has been chosen as Germany's savior. One day, this belief will be shared by others.
There are churchmen right through to the collapse of Germany in 44-45 who said that Hitler was the nearest thing to the redevelopment of the Christian principle in action.
The idea that he is the chosen one now permeates Hitler's political campaigning as he attempts to take the Nazis from a party of violence to one that can win an election.
A plane carrying Hitler would circle over the stadium in which he would speak, and then he would come down like a Messiah descending from the heavens. He would then wait until the crowd was so silent that you could hear a pin drop.
Der 6. Parteitag der Bewegung geht zu Ende.
Before he launched gradually into his oration, gradually building up to an enormous climax.
Und festigen und auf ihren Schultern tragen den deutschen Staat, das Deutsche Reich.
And this was enormously effective in winning the support of the masses.
Slowly, it starts to work. The Nazis become one of the biggest political parties in Parliament. Then in 1929 comes the event that will catapult Hitler into power. The Wall Street crash and the Great Depression. Germany is hit worse than any other country when American banks withdraw their loans.
Within a couple of years, 6 million Germans were out of work and really on the breadline.
People start longing for a strong leader to see them out of this crisis. So the Nazis surge in the polls. In 1933, the Nazis become the largest party in parliament, leading to the once imprisoned political agitator Adolf Hitler being offered the role of Chancellor of Germany. For a man with a God complex, it's a position he uses to decide who will live and who will die. He got here by democratic means. But now that democracy has served its purpose, it's time to put an end to it. He persuades Parliament to grant him emergency powers and suspend the Constitution. The German people have no idea what horrors they're in for. First, he begins his creation of a German master race.
What Hitler wanted was a racially pure master race. And of course, this involved selective breeding, it involved the fittest in society. It was the tallest, the fastest, the fittest.
In 1933, Hitler issues a law to prevent hereditarily diseased offspring. It's a racial hygiene program to sterilize parents and potential parents deemed to be undesirables from having children.
400,000 people are sterilized between 1933 and 1945, and these are ordinary German citizens because they don't fit the master race principle.
He then proclaims the Nazi Party is the only political party permitted in Germany and unleashes his stormtroopers. 4,000 communist politicians and their supporters are beaten up, imprisoned, or murdered, an action that destroys them as a political force. Now Hitler plots to eliminate all other political enemies, even those on his own side. Amongst them is the head of his stormtroopers, Ernst Röhm. Röhm has known him for years and is the only one permitted to call him Adolf. But Röhm is making too many independent noises for his Führer.
The pivotal moment in the creation of Hitler's dictatorship is the Night of the Long Knives. Almost like a Don Corleone evening with the aim of crushing the stormtroopers.
Hitler organizes a deadly trap. He orders all the stormtroopers' leadership corps to attend a meeting in the pretty holiday town of Bad Weisse in the far south of Germany. In the early morning hours, he arrives at a lakeside hotel in the town with members of the SS, his personal bodyguard. Together they make their way to Röhm's room. Hitler bursts in and says,
Aufstehen, Sie werden verhaftet!
"Get up, Ernst. You're under arrest for high treason." The following day, he's back in Berlin, hosting a tea party in the garden of the Chancellery for his cabinet and their families, as though all is normal. And for a man as evilly deranged as Hitler, it was. But in reality, over the last 24 hours, roughly 200 senior SA officers are arrested. Many are shot, including Röhm. Then he turns on his opponents outside the party. A code-worded phone call sets in motion what will become one of the most notorious events in Nazi history. Hitler eliminates members of the church and all his political enemies. The former Chancellor, General Schleicher, is shot down in his own home.
The man who'd sabotaged the beer hall putsch in 1923, Gustav von Kahr, was dragged out of his house, taken to a swamp and butchered with a pickaxe.
Hitler's actions hammer home that he really is a godlike supreme ruler of Germany. He now has the power to decide who lives and who dies. Having wiped out all opposition, he can now move on to the next phase of his revolution that he plotted in Mein Kampf, the elimination of the Jews. At the annual party rally, held in Nuremberg in 1935, the Nazis launched new laws. Marriage between Germans and Jews is prohibited. Jews are stripped of their citizenship and their civil rights.
Jews eventually were forced to wear the famous yellow stars. Brutal, menacing stormtroopers stood at the entrance to the stores with placards saying, "Don't buy from Jews."
3 years later, Hitler goes a stage further. His stormtroopers unleash their unique brand of terror throughout Nazi Germany and Austria. They call it the Night of Breaking Glass, or Kristallnacht. 1,000 synagogues are burnt, and 7,000 Jewish businesses are destroyed.
Jews themselves were physically attacked, scores of them were killed, swastikas were actually carved into their flesh.
30,000 Jewish men are arrested and sent to concentration camps, where most will perish. For the first time, the German people can see what Hitler's anti-Semitism really means. 250,000 Jews flee the country, but over 200,000 still remain. All the while, Hitler is building up his military to seize more land for Lebensraum. The treaties at the end of World War I have limited Germany's forces to just 100,000 troops. But as he promises in Mein Kampf, he creates the most advanced army in Europe.
We have the whole of Germany militarized, motorized, rearming at a rapid pace under his direction, and it is a country utterly transformed.
Hitler now pushes through his foreign policy goals towards Lebensraum. First, he sends his troops into the Rhineland, an area that had been part of Germany before World War I and has since been occupied. 2 years later, he annexes Austria, fulfilling his schoolboy dream of uniting the German and Austrian people.
We need back the Rhineland, we need Austria, we need all the parts were taken from us. There's a logic, and many people were convinced. Even Churchill said that in logic, Hitler had a case.
A year later, Hitler seizes a part of Czechoslovakia with a large German population, before pushing forward to take the rest of the country, even though there are no Germans there.
Germany needs to expand, needs to take territory, mainly towards its east.
Each time the result is the same. Britain and France talk tough, but do nothing. So when they say that they will declare war if he invades Poland, he ignores them. On September the 1st, 1939, Hitler attacks Poland. World War II begins. For the first time, foreign leaders see what a madman Hitler really is. Never before has an invading army targeted civilians with such wholesale savagery.
As Hitler himself said, this is a war of racial annihilation.
Anybody in your way, destroy. So civilians, as well as military, can be destroyed.
The German army's crimes are so horrific that at the time they have no name. Later, they will be called crimes against humanity. Tens of thousands of Poles are executed, and within 6 weeks, Poland is crushed. 2 million Polish Jews now find themselves in Nazi hands, awaiting their fate. In the spring of 1940, Denmark surrenders, and Norway is taken. From May through June, Hitler's tanks overrun France and the Low Countries. To Hitler, these successes reinforce his personal belief that he is the Messiah for the Aryan people, and remove any hesitation when it comes to invading Stalinist Russia.
In June 1941, having primed his army with the idea that mass murder was going to be not only tolerated but encouraged, he launched the attack on the Soviet Union.
The Führer regards this invasion as Germany's final struggle for Lebensraum, the living space, which he promised in Mein Kampf. And he commands his troops to flout the rules of war. As Slavs are racially inferior to Aryans, they do not deserve mercy. Soviet prisoners of war are sent to starvation camps, where 2.6 million perish from hunger, and another 500,000 are murdered. Even so, the evil Adolf Hitler is truly capable of, hasn't even started. By July 1941, his armies have invaded Poland and the Soviet Union countries, containing millions of Jews. Now at last he can enact the most evil of his racialist ideas, that the Jews are a cancer that must be cut out.
In pursuit of Hitler's insane ideal of physical and mental perfection, those who were deemed unworthy to be citizens of the new Reich were put to death.
Einsatzgruppen, special death squads, are sent in to murder the Polish and Russian Jews. Their victims are made to dig a trench. A first wave gets into the trench and then are shot. The next group get in and are shot and are laid on top of the first group. And on and on.
And something like 1.5 million Jews are shot in that process.
It's known as sardine packing. It's a means of eliminating the Jews that is both expensive and inefficient. In top secret, Hitler's henchmen are experimenting with other forms of mass murder. As a forerunner of what will become known as the final solution, Hitler's plan for the annihilation of all European Jews, the Nazis begin a secret euthanasia campaign to kill disabled children.
Children with Down syndrome or various other mental and physical disabilities would be taken away from their families, taken to a special hospital where they would be put to death by lethal injections.
Some 5,000 innocent, sick and disabled children are murdered by lethal injection, administered by carefully selected nurses and doctors. But this too proves to be slow and expensive. A secret department, known as T4, is set up to find a way of killing as many people as possible, quickly and quietly. It tries out poison carbon monoxide gas in shower rooms, where a further 70,000 physically and mentally disabled men, women, and children are killed. When the truth about the killing emerges, people are distressed that their friends or family members might be targeted.
Euthanasia went beyond what had originally been planned, so much so that many Germans, learning of it, began to protest. And he withdrew it, the programme, in late 41, realising that he'd gone beyond what they would accept.
Their protests teach the Führer that Germans don't like seeing mass slaughter. Future killings will have to be well hidden, far from Germany, and he must not be directly associated with any of it. These lessons will define how Hitler deals with the Jews. He realizes if he wants to carry on his secret plan of extermination, he must fool his people and give the appearance of the kind, caring leader. So he never personally signs a compromising document again.
He never ordered a Holocaust. There is no record, there is no document with his signature. However, everything that was done in his name.
And so in Adolf Hitler's name, the final solution is born: the annihilation of all the Jews in Europe. By December 1941, his final solution is underway. A network of extermination camps is built in Poland. Names like Belzec, Sobibor, Treblinka, Majdanek, and Auschwitz represent the culmination of his racial evil theories. Jews from all over Europe are rounded up and taken to these camps.
On arrival there, of course, some would have died, but would have perished of hunger and thirst on the journey. The cattle trucks would be unlocked, and the Jews would find themselves tumbling out onto the platform, where they would be met by SS guards with whips and holding famished dogs on leashes. They would be roughly separated into groups. Families would be brutally torn apart then and there. Some pathetic attempts were made to disguise the horror of what was happening. The gas chambers themselves were said to be delousing shower units, so the Jews would take off their clothes and would be driven naked into the gas chambers. The doors of the gas chambers would then be sealed. The gas were turned on, and horror scenes worse than Dante's Inferno would be enacted. The screams, the horror of men, women and children piled on top of one another. A truly horrifying, almost unimaginable scene.
Planned, organised, industrial-scale destruction of a whole people. That is new. That is something horrifically new.
I think Hitler is uniquely the most genocidally evil dictator that there ever was, and fundamentally, he was going to kill as many people who were outside of his master race principle as he possibly could.
Over the years, the killing machine is refined. From arrival to death of the Jewish prisoners now took less than an hour. These death chambers were easily capable of killing 12,000 to 15,000 victims every day. It culminates in the hell that is Auschwitz.
Auschwitz-Birkenau, most famous camp of that period, down in southern Poland. There are 6 death camps set up, all within occupied Poland, which are expressly designed for the mass killing of human beings.
It's just purely death. They're not camps in which people work or there's slave labour used. These are just pure and simple death camps.
Murder on such an industrial scale creates one particular problem. Hitler needs mass participation.
It involved office workers, train drivers, transportation of people, workers who worked in the camps, Nazi bureaucrats who had wives back in Germany. Nobody could be unaware about what was going on in the Holocaust because, of course, it involved everyone.
To make the Holocaust socially acceptable, Hitler's solution is to blame the Jews for their own destruction.
If the international Jewish financiers should succeed in plunging the nations once more into a world war, then the result will not be the victory of Jewry, but the annihilation of the Jewish race in Europe.
In that statement, Hitler attempts to absolve the German people of any guilt. The Jews are made responsible for their own misery. By the end of 1944, 6 million Jews are murdered on his approval. Hitler believes he's finally achieving his dream, but ultimately, he will be proved wrong. Those inferior people he so detests are now closing in on him. In 1945, Germany is being pummeled. And the Red Army are pushing towards Berlin and the Fuhrer.
It's an ultimate irony that the regime which was destined to last 1,000 years, in fact, only lasted 12, and was in the end reduced to an underground bunker beneath the shattered ruins of Hitler's chancellery in the middle of Berlin. It's a sort of grotesque, bizarre picture of a demented dictator in the last days of his life ruling what was by then a phantom Reich. In the end, he wanted total destruction. His view was, in the ruthless struggle for life, Germany had failed him, and therefore Germany deserved to die when he died.
For the Nazi messiah, Adolf Hitler, his victories are long gone, leaving him reduced to a doddery old man, high on a cocktail of drugs.
Hitler is in this bunker like a cornered rat. And at his last meal with his secretaries, he is talking not about the fate of the German Reich, not about the extermination of the Jews. He's actually, the subjects of his conversation is the ideal breeding of dogs, and the fact that in his view, lipstick is manufactured in France from excrement that's scraped from the walls of the Paris sewers.
One by one, his loyal cronies abandon him. One of the few people left is his mistress, Eva Braun, who he refuses to marry until the day before they commit suicide. Before his remaining advisors, the bride and groom swear they are both of pure Aryan descent. Shortly after 3 p.m. on the last day of April 1945, Hitler and his wife Eva withdraw to his private apartment in the bunker. He hands her a cyanide capsule. The decision is made. They will end their lives together. Eva takes the poison, and Hitler shoots himself with his Walter PPK. So ends the life of the most evil dictator the world has ever seen. Just over a week later, on May the 8th, 1945, Germany surrenders. Hitler's war is the bloodiest in the history of the world. And with the discovery of his death camps, everyone learns the true evil of his regime.
Hitler was something uniquely different in history. He was a man who brought ethnic cleansing and murder into the policy of a war.
The greatest testimony of how very wrong he was is modern Germany. Today, it is stable, democratic, multicultural, and tolerant. Everything that Hitler would have hated.